Carolyn, you need to clock off, Debbie shouted, her voice echoing through the dusty halls of Bayside Hall. We have a surprise for you at the pub. A big, delicious surprise. I peered over the mountain of invoices on my desk. My eyes were burning, and my head was spinning. I sent a weary smile to Debbie and Rebs. They were the estate cleaners, and I'd basically dragged them into helping me deep clean the entire mansion. My boss, Bertha, and her new billionaire husband, Lion Kurt, were flying in from Italy tomorrow. I had been working my socks off for weeks. This was my big chance to prove I deserved to be the acting estate manager. But when Bertha called me from Capri to say they were bringing a Mr. Duke with them, I went into a total panic. All my old insecurities, the ones from when I was a foster kid that nobody wanted, came rushing back. What if everything wasn't perfect? I really can't go. I gestured at the Everest of paperwork. Debbie and Rebs weren't having it. They marched over and grabbed my arms. No way, Carolyn. You deserve a break, Rebs announced. And we've got a surprise, remember? Debbie added. He's waiting at the pub? I was so shocked I actually let them lift me right out of my chair. Yes, Debbie teased. He's super fit, and he said he knew you from way back. I froze. I jerked out of their hold. Did he give you a name? He said you knew him as John, Rebs offered. The name ricocheted in my head. Heat flushed through my body, followed by a cold wave of guilt. John, the brooding 16-year-old bad boy everyone at the Somerset group home had idolized. Especially me. I remembered the day I was dumped at the home. My dad had kicked me into the system after my mom died. I was 13 and terrified, hiding in a cupboard and crying my eyes out. John had found me. What are you crying about? He had asked. So your dad didn't want you. So what? People have kids all the time they don't want. You're better off alone. But you've got yourself, and now you've got me too. I'll look out for you. He had looked out for me. He was my first crush and my only friend. And then, in a stupid attempt to protect him, I ended up destroying his life. Fine, I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. Give me half an hour to change. I'm coming. I struggled to control my racing pulse as I walked into the Talbot Arms. My breath caught when I saw him. He didn't look like the John I remembered. He looked like a man, a dangerous, powerful man. His dark hair was longer now, curling around his collar. His cobalt blue eyes were shadowed with secrets. He wore faded jeans and a black t-shirt that showed off his muscular frame. I watched him from across the room. He looked like he owned the place. He caught my eye, and his gaze roamed over my black dress and leather boots. My lungs seized. John, I whispered as I reached the table. It's so good to see you again. Carolyn, he murmured. He looked at me with a strange intensity. You grew up. That's what usually happens, I tried to joke, but my voice was shaky. Since when do you care about legalities, John? I whispered, leaning in. He tensed. I care about them now, he said stiffly. And no one calls me John anymore. It's Nathan. My smile died. I felt a pang of rejection. But then I saw the way he looked at me. It wasn't just recognition. It was hunger. I knew why he was here. I had told the social workers years ago that he was being forced to rob a pharmacy. I thought I was saving him, but he got arrested instead. I had spent years thinking I'd ruined his life. But as we sat in a booth later, he surprised me. I didn't get your letters, he said roughly. But Carolyn, you probably saved my life that night. Getting hit by that police car was the wake-up call I needed. I'm in a better place now. You are? He chuckled, his thumb caressing my neck. I've worked my arse off. I'm a billionaire now, Carolyn. I have everything I ever wanted. He leaned in, his lips hovering over mine. In fact, I should thank you properly. When he kissed me, the world disappeared. It was searing and hungry. I didn't care about the past anymore. I just wanted him. How would you feel about taking this trip down memory lane somewhere more private? He asked. I live at Bayside Hall, I said breathlessly. Let's go. We rode his motorbike through the gates of the estate, the moonlight turning the mansion into a silver palace. I felt John tense up as we approached. Impressive, he muttered. I led him inside, my heart in my throat. We weren't supposed to be here. Not like this. I was the acting manager, and I was about to sneak a man into the master bedroom. But John felt like home and danger all at once. We deserve this, he said, pulling me into the lavish room. The night was a blur of heat and passion. It was fast, furious, and moving. When it was over, we lay tangled in the silk sheets of the four-poster bed. That was extreme, John whispered. He sounded almost unsure of himself. I smiled, but then a thought hit me. I looked at the expensive furniture and the moonlight on the walls. We shouldn't be here, I whispered. We don't belong here. I thought that was the point, he said, his thumb stroking my wrist. It's too late for regrets, Carolyn. He was right. I was in too deep now. But as we lay there, I realized I didn't even know what he did for a living. How do you know Mr. Kurt? I asked. John's fingers paused in my hair. Just through business, he said vaguely. Investments. Our paths have crossed a few times. I looked at him, feeling a sudden chill. He was a billionaire now. He was powerful. And he had tracked me down right when I was managing the estate he seemed so interested in. Do you really think he doesn't love Bertha? I asked, thinking of my boss. John let out a harsh, cynical laugh. The guy has to have an angle, Carolyn. Trust me. People like us, we always have an angle. I looked into his blue eyes and wondered, what's your angle, John? The sun hadn't even fully cleared the horizon when the sound of a luxury car engine purring up the gravel drive jolted me awake. I sat bolt upright in the massive four-poster bed, the silk sheets sliding down my skin. Beside me, Nathan, I still couldn't get used to calling him that, was already awake. He was standing by the window, his back to me, watching the driveway through a gap in the heavy velvet curtains. They're early, he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Who? I scrambled out of bed, grabbing my dress from the floor. Bertha and Kurt aren't supposed to be here for hours. Well, tell that to the silver Bentley parked at the front steps, Nathan replied. He turned around, and for a second, the cold, calculating billionaire was gone, replaced by the boy who used to jump out of windows to dodge the police. You need to move. Fast. My heart felt like it was going to burst through my ribs. If Bertha found me here, in the master suite, with a man after I'd spent all week bragging about how perfectly I was managing the estate, I was finished. My career, my reputation, the only place I'd ever felt at home, all of it would be gone in a heartbeat. The back stairs, I hissed, shoving my feet into my boots. You have to get to your bike, if Kurt sees you. He won't, Nathan said, but he didn't move. He was looking at a leather folder on the bedside table, the one containing the secret renovation plans for the Bayside wing. Carolyn, go. I'll find my own way out. I didn't have time to argue. I sprinted down the service corridor, my heart hammering. I barely made it to the ground floor and into the kitchen when the front doors swung open. Carolyn, darling, are you awake? Bertha's voice boomed through the foyer. I smoothed my hair, took a deep breath, and walked out to meet them. Bertha looked radiant in a white linen suit, leaning into her new husband, Lion Kurt. But it was the man standing behind them that made my blood run cold. Mr. Duke, Bertha introduced him, gesturing to a tall, sharp-featured man with eyes like ice. He's the representative for the group interested in the future of Bayside. Mr. Duke didn't smile. He looked at me like I was a bug under a microscope. A pleasure, he said, though he didn't mean it. I've heard the estate is being managed informally lately. My face burned. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but a heavy thud from upstairs cut me off. Lion Kurt's head snapped up. His eyes narrowed, and he looked toward the master suite. I thought you said the hall was empty, Carolyn? It is, I squeaked, my mind racing. It's probably just the wind. The old windows, you know. The wind doesn't wear biker boots, Mr. Duke said coldly. He started toward the stairs. I think we should check the guest quarters. Security is a major concern for my clients. I stood there, frozen, as the three of them began to climb the grand staircase. At the top of those stairs was the master bedroom. The bed still unmade, the scent of Nathan's cologne still heavy in the air, and my discarded lace panties likely still crumpled on the floor. I was seconds away from a total disaster. And the worst part? I didn't know if Nathan was hiding or if he'd already left with the information he'd come for. My stomach dropped as I followed them up the stairs. Every step felt like a march to the gallows. Bertha was chatting away about the Italian coast, but Lion Kurt remained silent, his eyes fixed on the master suite door. The security of this wing is paramount, Mr. Duke said, his voice clipping every word. My clients won't tolerate a house that isn't airtight. We reached the landing. My breath was coming in short, shallow gasps. Duke reached for the handle of the master bedroom. I wanted to scream, to trip, to do anything to stop him. He pushed the door open. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the explosion. As you can see, Lion Kurt's voice rang out, surprisingly calm. Everything is exactly as it should be. I opened one eye, then the other. I gasped. The room was perfect. The four-poster bed was made with military precision. Not a single wrinkle in the silk sheets. My clothes were gone. The scent of cologne had been replaced by the sharp, clean smell of the lemon polish we'd used yesterday. Even the curtains were pulled back perfectly to let in the morning light. It was like the last 6 hours had never happened. "Humph," Duke muttered, walking into the room. He ran a gloved finger over the dresser. I could have sworn I heard movement. "Old houses have many voices, Mr. Duke," Kurt said, though he was looking at me with an unreadable expression. "Carolyn, you look like you've seen a ghost. Are you quite well?" I'm fine, sir," I stammered. "Just a long night of making sure everything was ready for your arrival." Bertha beamed at me. "See, Lion? I told you she was the best. She's worked herself to the bone." Duke finished his sweep of the room and headed back toward the hall. Bertha followed him, eager to show off the gallery. But Lion Kurt lingered. He waited until they were out of earshot, then he stepped closer to me. "A word of advice, Carolyn," he whispered, his voice like velvet over gravel. "The next time you decide to entertain a guest in my bed, make sure he doesn't leave his lighter behind." He opened his hand. Resting in his palm was a heavy silver Zippo. Engraved on the side was a single word, John. My heart stopped. Kurt closed his hand, pocketing the lighter. "Don't worry. I have no interest in Bertha's domestic dramas. But be careful. The man you were with isn't here for the scenery. He's here for my throne." He turned and walked away before I could say a word. I leaned against the doorframe, my legs shaking. Nathan was gone. He had cleaned the room in seconds and vanished like a shadow. But he'd left a trail, and now the billionaire owner of Bayside Hall had leverage over me. I checked my pocket. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Check the floorboards under the vanity. We aren't done yet. B." I waited until the sound of their voices faded toward the north wing. My hands were shaking so hard I had to grip the edge of the dresser just to stay upright. Lion Kurt knew. He had John's lighter, and he knew exactly what we had been doing in his bed. But I couldn't think about that yet. I had to know what Nathan had left for me. I sprinted back into the master suite and locked the door. I scrambled across the floor on my hands and knees toward the heavy oak vanity. I felt along the floorboards, my fingernails digging into the wood until I felt a slight give. I pried the board up. Tucked inside was a small high-tech USB drive and a handwritten note. "They aren't here to buy the house, Carolyn. They're here to strip it. Look at the files. Don't trust Duke, and don't trust Kurt. Meet me at the pub at midnight. Destroy this note." My head spun. Strip the house? Bayside Hall was Bertha's dream. It was the only place I'd ever felt like I belonged. If they were planning to tear it apart for parts and profit, I had to stop them. But the face slap came sooner than I expected. A sharp knock at the door made me jump. "Carolyn? It's Bertha. Open up, dear." I shoved the USB into my bra and the note into my pocket, then smoothed my dress and unlocked the door. Bertha was standing there, but she wasn't smiling anymore. Her face was pale. "Carolyn, something terrible has happened," she whispered. "The bank just called. The estate's accounts. They've been emptied. Every penny of the investment fund is gone." My blood ran cold. "What? How?" "They're saying the authorization came from your computer," Bertha said, her voice trembling. "Mr. Duke is calling the police. He says you've been working with a known criminal to rob us." At that exact moment, Mr. Duke appeared behind her, 2 police officers in tow. A smug, cold smile played on his lips. "Carolyn Green," the officer said, "you're under arrest for grand theft and fraud." As they clicked the handcuffs onto my wrists, I looked past them to the driveway. I saw a black SUV pulling away, and for a split second, I saw the silhouette of a man in the back seat. It wasn't Nathan. It was Lion Kurt, and he was holding my personal employee file in his hand. I had been set up, and the only person who could save me was the bad boy billionaire I had betrayed 10 years ago. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into my wrists. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Bertha was crying, her hands covering her mouth, while Mr. Duke watched me with the calm, satisfied look of a hunter who had finally trapped his prey. "There must be some mistake," I gasped, my voice sounding small and desperate. "I didn't touch those accounts. I have proof." "Proof?" Mr. Duke let out a dry, humorless laugh. "The digital footprint is undeniable, Carolyn. You were the only one with access codes to the estate's main terminal, and we have witnesses who saw you meeting with a man, an ex-convict, at the local pub last night." My heart hammered against the USB drive hidden in my bra. It felt like it was burning a hole in my skin. If I revealed it now, Duke might just grab it and destroy it. I needed to be smart. I needed to be the girl who Nathan taught to survive. "I want to speak to my lawyer," I said, lifting my chin. My voice was shaky, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a scared foster kid. I felt like a woman with a mission. "You won't be needing a lawyer, dear," Bertha sobbed. "You've confessed. You sent an email from your terminal at 3 a.m. admitting to everything." My brain reeled. 3 a.m.? I had been in bed. With Nathan. He had left the bed. The realization hit me like a physical blow. While I was sleeping, while I was dreaming about a future with him, he had been at my computer. He had been stealing the money. The police officers didn't wait for more excuses. They gripped my arms, one on each side, and began to march me toward the front door. I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. Hair messy, dress crumpled, and my wrists bound. I looked exactly like the failure everyone said I would be. As we reached the front steps, the morning air was crisp and cruel. A police cruiser was waiting, lights flashing. "Wait," I shouted, struggling against the officer's grip. "Look at the time of the transfer. Check the internal logs. I wasn't even in the office." "Save it for the station, miss," the officer muttered. Just as he reached for the car door, a sleek, matte black motorbike roared up the driveway, skidding to a halt just inches from the police cruiser's bumper. The engine cut out, and the silence that followed was deafening. Nathan stepped off the bike. He wore a dark leather jacket, his eyes hidden behind black aviators. He didn't look at the police. He looked straight at me. "Let her go," he said, his voice cold enough to freeze the gravel. Mr. Duke stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "And who the hell are you? This is police business." Nathan reached into his jacket, but he didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a sleek, white tablet and held it up. "My name is Nathan Howe, and I just bought the debt that Lyon Kurt owes to the bank, which means as of 10 seconds ago, I own this estate, and you, Duke, are trespassing." The world tilted. My heart didn't just beat, it shattered. He wasn't saving me. He was taking the house. The world seemed to spin into a vortex of blurred faces and flashing lights. I was pushed into the back of the cruiser, the metal bench biting into my skin, but my eyes were locked on Nathan, or Nathan, as I'd known him. He wasn't the broken boy from Somerset anymore. He was a shark in a leather jacket, and I was the bait. "You can't do this," Bertha shrieked from the porch, her husband Lyon Kurt standing silently behind her, his face a mask of calculated neutrality. "That estate has been in my family for generations." Nathan didn't blink. He tossed a document toward the lead officer, who caught it with a look of growing confusion. "Check the signatures, officer. The deed was transferred at midnight. The previous owner, Mr. Kurt, had full authority to sell. It's all perfectly legal." He turned his back on them, on me, and walked toward the cruiser. He leaned down, resting his hand on the open window, his face inches from mine. His blue eyes, once so warm and full of chemistry, were now frozen, empty depths of blue ice. "Don't look so tragic, Carolyn," he whispered. "You always wanted to be part of the big leagues. Welcome to the show." He turned and strode away, and the police car roared to life, pulling away from the hall that had been my only home. As we rattled down the gravel drive, the USB drive in my bra felt like a ticking bomb. The drive was my only hope. When we reached the precinct and I was left alone in the interrogation room, I didn't wait for the officers to return. I risked everything, slipping the drive into the port of the computer in the corner of the room. My fingers flew across the keys. I wasn't just a cleaner or an estate manager. I had spent years learning the architecture of Bayside Hall, and now I was learning the architecture of a billionaire's greed. The files weren't just bank records. They were a map. I watched in horror as the screen filled with architectural schematics. Bayside Hall wasn't being renovated to be preserved, it was being hollowed out, Under the guise of modernization, they were installing high-tech sensors, subterranean data storage arrays, and buried deep beneath the foundations, a vault system that dated back to the Cold War. They didn't want the house. They wanted the land. The unique electromagnetic isolation of the valley, perfect for storing data that could never be touched by the outside world. And Bertha? She was just the pretty face they'd used to keep the estate occupied while they did the heavy digging. But the final file, a video log, stopped my breath. It was dated from 3 weeks ago. In it, Leon Kurt was speaking to someone in the shadows. "The girl is the perfect patsy," Kurt said, his voice smooth and cruel. "She has no family, no history that can't be erased, and a desperate need to be loved. If we pin the theft on her, the police won't dig into the accounts. They'll just lock the door and throw away the key." And the voice from the shadows? It was Nathan's. "Make sure she doesn't break," Nathan replied. "I need her to think she's the one who failed. That's the only way she'll keep the secret of the vault to her grave." I felt a surge of rage so pure it burned away the fear. I wasn't the kid hiding anymore. I was the one who had run this estate. I knew the plumbing, the electrical grids, and the secret passages that even the architects hadn't bothered to map. I quickly copied the files to a secure cloud server, setting them to broadcast to every major news outlet if I didn't check in every 12 hours. Then I sent a message to a contact I had made during my years in the system. A journalist who had been looking for a break on the Kurt conglomerate for years. The door opened. An officer walked in, looking tired. "You have a visitor, Green. Apparently your lawyer is here." I stood up, adjusting my posture. I wouldn't be a victim. Nathan walked into the room. He looked at me, expecting to see a broken girl. Instead, he saw someone who looked back at him with the cold, hardened resolve of someone who had nothing left to lose. "I didn't expect you to come," I said, my voice steady. "I imagine not," he said, pulling out a chair. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I own the building now, Carolyn. I can make this go away. I can get you out of this room, out of this country. You just need to hand over the drive." "What drive?" I asked, my heart hammering a rhythm of defiance. "I don't have anything." He leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. "Don't play games. I know you saw the files." "I saw that you're a monster, Nathan," I said, the name sounding like a curse. "You think you're so smart? You think because you made your first billion, you can just erase people like we're numbers on a screen? You forgot one thing." "And what's that?" he asked, his smugness faltering for the first time. "I grew up in the system," I said, leaning into his space. "I learned how to disappear, how to hide, and how to fight when there was no one else in the room. You taught me that, remember? I'll look out for you." I saw a flicker of the old John, the boy who had held my hand in the dark, flash across his face. It was gone in an instant, but it was there. "Give it to me, Carolyn," he said, his voice dangerously low. "No," I said. "I'm going to release it all, every file, every conversation. By tomorrow morning, the world will know exactly what you and Kurt are doing to Bayside. You'll be in a cell next to mine." He stood up, his chair clattering to the floor. "You're making a mistake. You have no idea what these people are capable of." "I think I do," I said. "And I think you're scared because for the first time, you don't have a pawn." He didn't answer. He turned and walked out, but I noticed something he left behind on the table. A key card. It was for the side door of the precinct. He didn't want me to stay. He wanted me to run. If I ran, I was guilty. If I stayed, I had to prove my innocence. He was still trying to manipulate the board, but still trying to control the narrative. I looked at the key card, then at the camera in the corner. I knew the system was watching. If I left, I'd be a fugitive, but if I stayed, I'd be buried. I took the card. The hallways of the police station were quiet, lit by the flickering hum of fluorescent lights. I moved with the stealth I'd perfected as a child, avoiding the main desk and slipping through the service corridor. I reached the side door, slid the card, and stepped out into the night. The cool air hit my face, and for a moment, I just breathed and reached into my pocket and touched the small, hidden burner phone I had taken from Nathan's jacket while he was distracted earlier. It buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "They know you're gone. Head to the old quarry. I'll meet you there." I hesitated. Should I trust him again? Could I? He had set me up. He had stolen my life, and he had destroyed the only home I'd ever had. But in his eyes back there, for that 1 second, I had seen something else, a flicker of regret. Or was that just another layer of his con? I didn't have a choice. I disappeared into the shadows, a ghost in my own life, heading toward the quarry. The story wasn't over, it was just getting started. I had the files, I had the evidence, and now I had the hunt. The gravel crunched under my boots, a sound that seemed deafening in the hollow silence of the old quarry. I was Carolyn Smith, the girl from Somerset, the girl who had clawed her way to the top of the Bayside estate only to be thrown into the gutter by the one person I had trusted. My pulse was a frantic bird against my ribs. I knew the quarry layout like the back of my hand. I had played here as a kid during my brief, chaotic time in the county's care, back when home was just a word on a social worker's file. Now it was my battlefield. I saw the glow of his cigarette before I saw him. Nathan stood on the edge of the precipice, his silhouette stark against the moonlight. He wasn't wearing his expensive suit anymore. He was dressed for a fight, clad in dark tactical gear that made him look every bit the bad boy from my teenage memories. "You came?" he said without turning around. "I have the files, Nathan," I said, my voice cold. I kept my hand on the hidden burner phone in my pocket. "And I have the broadcast trigger. You want the drive? You're going to have to do more than threaten me." He turned. His expression was unreadable, a mix of exhaustion and something sharper, something more dangerous. "You think you're playing a game of chess, Carolyn. You're playing Russian roulette. If you release those files, you don't just take down Kurt. You take down the entire financial infrastructure of this sector. You'll be the most wanted woman in the country." "Maybe that's better than being a puppet," I retorted. I moved closer, stepping into the small circle of light he occupied. "Tell me the truth. Why the setup? Why use me?" He let out a sharp, self-deprecating laugh. "Because you were the only one who wouldn't look. I needed you at the estate because you were the only person who knew the secret tunnels of the original foundation, the ones the architects ignored. I needed those files, but I couldn't get to them without you. So you used me? You let me believe that we had a connection?" "The connection was the only real thing, Carolyn," he exploded, his composure shattering. He took a step toward me, his hands reaching out before he caught himself. "I didn't want to destroy you. I wanted to save you from Kurt. He's not just a billionaire, he's a front for a shadow conglomerate that liquidates estates and erases the people who run them. I needed to move the assets and get you out of the line of fire." I laughed, a jagged, broken sound. "Save me? You had me arrested. You stood there while they put cuffs on me." "Because I knew they'd put you in the precinct, where you'd be safe from Kurt's private security," he hissed. "I gave you the key card. I gave you a way out." I stared at him, my mind spinning. Was it true? Was the whole nightmare a convoluted, desperate attempt at protection? Or was it just another layer of the con? "You're a liar, Nathan," I whispered. "You're a professional at it." Suddenly, the roar of an engine broke the night air. Headlights crested the hill of the quarry, blinding us. A black SUV slammed to a halt, followed by two more. Men in tactical gear swarmed out, weapons raised. "Lion Kurt," Nathan muttered, his hand dropping to his belt where he had a concealed sidearm. "He's early. Get down," Nathan shouted, shoving me behind a heavy concrete slab. A barrage of gunfire tore through the air, sending sparks flying off the rocks. I huddled in the dirt, the cold bite of the quarry floor seeping into my skin. This was it. The fairy tale of Bayside Hall, the romance, the career, it all ended in the mud of a place I'd tried so hard to forget. "The files, Carolyn," Nathan screamed over the sound of shots. "Give me the drive. I can upload them to an encrypted server that's off the grid. If you keep them on your person, they'll kill you for them." I hesitated. I looked at the drive in my hand. If I gave it to him, I lost my only leverage. If I kept it, I was a target. "I'm not letting you take them," I yelled back. "I'm sending them to the press. They'll intercept the signal before it reaches the tower." I realized he was right. My phone signal was too weak, and the surrounding stone of the quarry was acting as a natural Faraday cage. I looked at the layout of the quarry in my mind. There was an old ventilation shaft that led to the abandoned pump station below the site. If I could get to the terminal there, I could hardwire the files directly into the city's main grid. Cover me, I shouted. Are you crazy? Do it. Nathan stepped out from behind the slab, laying down suppressing fire with an efficiency that told me he had never truly left his violent past behind. I scrambled into the shadows, running toward the old, rusted ladder leading down to the bowels of the quarry. I dropped into the darkness, the smell of damp earth and oil filling my lungs. I climbed down, my hands burning on the rusted iron rungs. Above, the gunfire grew more distant. I reached the bottom and moved through the subterranean tunnels. This was where the invisible work happened, the pipes and conduits that kept the hall running. I reached the terminal room, a small, cramped space that looked like a scene from a cyberpunk thriller. I plugged the drive into the central controller. A progress bar crawled across the screen. 20%, 40%. The door to the tunnel groaned. Someone was coming. I looked for a weapon, finding only a heavy wrench on the floor. I stood by the door, my heart hammering. The lock clicked and a figure stepped into the dim light. It wasn't Kurt, it was Mr. Duke. You really were the best manager we ever had, Carolyn, he said, holding a silenced pistol. So efficient. It's a pity your curiosity was your undoing. You killed them, didn't you? I said, my voice trembling. The ones before me. They lacked your resourcefulness, he said, stepping closer. But now, you're just another administrative error. He raised the gun. I didn't think. I swung the wrench with everything I had. It connected with his wrist, the gun skidding across the floor. We lunged for it, wrestling in the mud and oil, the sounds of our struggle echoing in the tight space. I felt his fingers closing around my throat, the world darkening at the edges. Give up, he hissed. I kicked out, hitting the console. The computer sputtered, and suddenly the upload reached 100%. A massive, high-pitched chirp filled the room as the data pushed through to every major server in the country. Duke froze. He checked his tablet. His face went gray. You fool, he whispered. You've just declared war on people you can't even name. The tunnel wall behind him suddenly exploded in a cloud of debris. Nathan tumbled in, bruised and bleeding, a look of pure, unadulterated rage on his face. He slammed into Duke, driving him against the wall and knocking him unconscious with a single, brutal blow. He turned to me, his chest heaving. Is it done? It's everywhere, I breathed. He didn't celebrate. He grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the tunnel's exit. We have to move. When this news hits, every Black Ops team in the sector will be coming for us. The quarry won't hold them for long. Where are we going? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the boy I'd loved in the home, the one who promised he'd look out for me. We're gonna make sure they can't touch us again. I know a place, somewhere that doesn't exist on any map. As we ran out into the cold night, the sirens of police cruisers finally pierced the air. The world was changing. The secrets of Bayside Hall, the corruption of the city, and the lies that had defined my life were all being dismantled in real time. I looked at Nathan, then back at the hall, looming in the distance like a monolith. I had been a pawn, then a suspect, and finally an expose. But as we jumped onto his bike and roared into the darkness, I realized I was finally something else entirely. I was the one holding the match. The dawn light that filtered through the thick, overgrown trees of the forest felt less like a sunrise and more like a spotlight. We were miles from the quarry, deep in the dense, forgotten territory that separated the county from the northern border. My body felt like it had been put through a meat grinder. My muscles screamed in protest, and my skin was a road map of bruises and dried mud. But my pulse was steady. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running from someone. I was running toward something. Nathan killed the engine of the bike. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. He climbed off, his movements stiff, and started walking toward a dense patch of brambles. He didn't look back to see if I was following. He knew I was. Where are we? I asked, my voice raspy from the smoke and adrenaline of the night before. The place I told you about, he said, not breaking stride. The place that doesn't exist. He pushed aside a heavy curtain of ivy that masked the entrance to a cave system, the kind that locals whispered about but never dared to enter. This wasn't just a natural cave. As we stepped inside, the temperature dropped, and the air grew thin, smelling of ozone and ionized air. This was a server hub, a relic from the height of the Cold War, retrofitted with modern, high-end tech. This was where Nathan had been hiding his own digital trail for years. He walked to a central console and began typing. Within seconds, the monitors on the walls flickered to life. The news was already breaking. Billionaire Lion Kurt's empire crumbles following massive data leak. Bayside Hall found to be center of illegal global data mining operation. The headlines screamed. I watched the scrolling text, the names of the politicians, the offshore accounts, the connections to illegal surveillance, and I felt a strange, hollow sort of peace. The evidence was undeniable. The world was watching the collapse of the empire I had once served. They'll be coming, I said. Even if the news is out, people like Kurt don't just walk away. Nathan finally turned to face me. He looked stripped down, the billionaire facade discarded. He looked like the boy from Somerset again, tattered, dangerous, and haunted. They won't find us here, he said. I've spent years prepping this exit. The servers are scrubbed, the location is cloaked, and there's enough here to keep us off the grid for the rest of our lives. I walked toward him, the hum of the servers vibrating in the floorboards beneath my feet. Is that what you want? To live in a cave, running from the ghosts we created? What choice do we have? He challenged. You're an accomplice, Carolyn. You're a fugitive. If we go back, we're dead or in a cell. I'm not a fugitive, I said, my voice gaining strength. I'm the person who exposed the truth. And I'm not running anymore. I walked to the terminal and pulled up the master control. I looked at the files, the very ones I had uploaded to the public. There was one file left, one that Nathan hadn't shown me. It wasn't about Kurt, or the hall, or the data mining. It was a file titled Carolyn. I opened it. It contained every document regarding my life, my birth certificate, the records of my time in the foster system, and the medical reports from the night of the pharmacy robbery. But there was something else, a series of bank transfers. Every time I had moved to a new home, every time I had struggled to pay for school, there had been an anonymous donor. The dates lined up. It started the week after the night Nathan had been arrested. I looked at him, my throat tightening. You were watching me. All those years. You were the one who made sure I had a roof over my head. Nathan looked away, his jaw tight. I knew they'd put you in the system, and I knew what that was like. I promised I'd look out for you, and I meant it. I just couldn't be there myself. I had to grow up, had to build the power to make sure you never had to be afraid again. You did all this for me? I did it for the person you were, he said, his voice raw. But you're not that person anymore. You're someone who fights back. You're someone who doesn't need looking after. The cave was quiet, save for the rhythmic pulse of the servers. I realized then that my love for him hadn't been a weakness. It had been the catalyst. It was the reason I had survived, the reason I had learned to be strong, the reason I had walked into the lion's den at Bayside Hall and kept my head high. I don't want to hide, Nathan, I said, stepping into his space. The truth is out. Kurt is done. If we stay here, we're just continuing the cycle of shadows. We can go back. We can testify. We can show them that we aren't the products of the system. We're the people who broke it. He looked at me, a flicker of fear in his eyes. Not for himself, but for me. If you go back, you lose your anonymity. You lose your freedom. I already lost those when I walked into the hall, I said. I'd rather be free in the daylight than hidden in the dark. He stood in silence for a long time. Then, a slow, sad smile crept across his face. It was the first time I had seen it, a genuine unmasked expression. You really did grow up, he whispered. He reached out and took my hand. His skin was rough, calloused from years of survival, but his touch was gentle. It felt like the night in the cupboard, the moment he had first told me he would look out for me. Only this time, we were looking out for each other. Okay, he said. We go back. The drive back to the city was surreal. The world felt different, sharper. The morning sun was brilliant, cutting through the smog of the city as we approached the police headquarters. We weren't hiding. We were walking straight to the front door. As we walked up the steps, the press was waiting, the cameras flashing like lightning in the gray morning. The news had traveled fast. The story of the Bayside whistleblower had captured the nation's attention. I stopped at the top of the stairs, looking down at the sea of microphones and cameras. I saw the fear in the faces of the people who had once controlled me. The lawyers, the executives, the police who had been bought. They weren't looking at me with dismissal anymore. They were looking at me with the kind of terror reserved for those who hold the truth. I looked at Nathan. He took my hand, his grip firm. "Ready?" he asked. "I've been ready for 10 years, I replied. I stepped forward into the lights. I didn't care about the fame, the danger, or the uncertainty of what was to come. I had my past, I had my scars, and I had the man who had been my anchor through the darkest of times. The story of Carolyn Green and Nathan Howe wasn't a fairy tale. It was a war story. And as I faced the cameras, I knew one thing for certain. The era of secrets was over. I was finally, truly, in control of my own life. I spoke into the microphone, my voice clear and unwavering, ringing out across the square. "My name is Carolyn, and I have a story to tell you." The crowd went silent. The cameras zoomed in, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a discarded doll or a runaway kid. I felt like a force of nature. The systems that had tried to break us, to define us, to use us, they were crumbling. And as I looked out at the city, I realized that the best part of the story wasn't the revenge or the money or even the truth. It was the fact that, against all odds, we were still here. We were together. And we were finally, for the very first time, completely free. The shadows behind us didn't matter anymore. The only thing that mattered was the light we had brought into the room. And as I finished my statement, looking into the lens of the world's eyes, I knew the journey had just begun. But I also knew that wherever we went, whatever we faced, we would face it together, not as the scared kids from Somerset, but as the people who had survived the fire and come out stronger on the other side. The truth had set us free, and it was a weight I was finally ready to carry. I took a deep breath, looked at the horizon, and smiled. The sun was up. It was time to start living. The transition from the flash bulbs of the press conference to the sterile, echoing halls of the federal courthouse was a blur of motion and sound. Every step felt heavier than the last, not because of the weight of the handcuffs, which had been removed hours ago, but because of the gravity of what lay ahead. For the first time in a decade, I wasn't reacting to someone else's script. I was writing my own. Nathan walked beside me, his presence a constant, grounding force. He had traded his tactical gear for a suit that looked as sharp as his wit, though the cold, calculating edge in his eyes had softened into something resembling genuine hope. We didn't speak. There was no need. The silence between us had evolved from the awkward, strained quiet of two damaged children to the profound, shared understanding of two survivors who had finally found their way to the surface. The courtroom was packed, a sea of cameras and observers eager to witness the fall of the Bayside conglomerate. When I took the stand, the room went so still I could hear the hum of the air conditioning unit overhead. "State your name for the record," the prosecutor prompted, his voice professional and measured. "Carolyn Green," I said, my voice steady, projecting to the very back of the gallery where I knew the world's eyes were focused. "And you were the acting estate manager for Bayside Hall?" "I was," I replied, looking directly at Lyon Kurt. He sat at the defense table, his composure finally beginning to fracture. Beside him, Mr. Duke looked like a man who was already measuring the dimensions of a prison cell. "Miss Green, would you tell the jury exactly how the financial and data mining operations were conducted?" I began to speak. I didn't stumble, and I didn't hesitate. I laid it all out, the way Bertha had been used as a pawn, the systematic hollowing out of the estate, the falsified records, and the dark reality of the subterranean vault. I spoke for hours, my testimony a relentless tide of truth that washed away the layers of deceit Kurt and his associates had built over the years. When I finished, I didn't look at the judge. I looked at Nathan. He gave me a single, infinitesimal nod. It was the acknowledgement of 10 years of struggle, of the nights spent hiding in the dark, and the final realization that we had won. The trial was long, exhausting, and emotionally devastating. But when the verdict finally came down, guilty on all counts for Kurt, Duke, and their primary facilitators, the roar of the crowd outside the courthouse sounded like the beginning of a new world. In the weeks that followed, the legal dust began to settle. The Bayside estate was placed into a trust, with a portion of the liquidated assets redirected to the Somerset Group home and other institutions like it. places where kids like us had once been forgotten. Nathan and I found ourselves in a position of unexpected influence. We were the faces of the movement, the whistleblowers who had brought down a titan. But the spotlight was never what we wanted. We wanted the silence of the woods, the rhythm of a normal day, and the ability to look at each other without the constant reminder of danger. One afternoon, we returned to the estate. It was no longer the site of our trauma, but a sprawling, quiet monument to the past. The scaffolding had been removed, and the hall sat under a bright, clear blue sky, its palladium splendor finally looking like a home rather than a cage. "It looks different," I said, leaning against the stone railing of the front steps. "It's the same," Nathan replied, standing beside me. "We're the ones who are different." He was right. We had spent so much of our lives defined by the systems that governed us: the foster system, the juvenile detention centers, the corporate hierarchies. We had been taught that we were nothing, that we were replaceable, that our pasts were the only things that would ever define our futures, but we had proven them wrong. "What now?" I asked. Nathan looked out over the fields. "I'm divesting. Moving the rest of the funds into independent oversight. I want to build something that lasts. Not an empire, but a foundation for kids who are currently hiding, waiting for someone to find them." "You want to be the donor?" I smiled. "I want to be the one who changes the rules," he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn piece of silver. It was the Zippo lighter Leon Kurt had confiscated from the bedroom. He had managed to get it back during the final settlement. "I don't need this anymore." He handed it to me. I turned the metal over in my palm. The name John was still engraved on the side, a relic of a boy who had long since ceased to exist. "Do you ever miss him?" I asked quietly. "The boy who thought he was just a bad influence?" Nathan laughed, a sound that finally felt completely, undeniably free. "Every day, but he gave me a better life than he ever had, and I'm thankful for that." We didn't stay at Bayside. We moved to a quiet coastal town, a place where no one knew our names or our history. We bought a small, unassuming house with a garden that faced the sea. It wasn't a mansion, and it didn't have any hidden vaults, but it was ours. Life became simple. We spent our days working on projects that mattered, mentoring kids in the local community, writing articles about the dangers of unchecked corporate power, and building a life that was centered on the one thing we'd never had: stability. There were nights, of course, when the shadows still felt long, when the silence of the house would remind me of the quiet of the institution, or when Nathan would wake up in the middle of the night, haunted by the echo of a siren. In those moments, we didn't hide. We talked, we remembered. We acknowledged the scars, and we reminded each other that the fire was out. The world eventually moved on. New scandals broke, new billionaires rose to power, and the story of the Bayside whistleblowers faded into the archives of the digital age. But for us, the legacy remained in the quiet work we did. The letters we received from kids who had read our story and felt a glimmer of hope, and the profound peace of waking up next to the only person who truly knew the person I had been and the person I had become. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gold, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea. Nathan came out and sat beside me, his arm draped over my shoulders. "You know," I said, looking out at the waves, "I never thought I'd be here." "Neither did I," he replied, "but here we are." I looked at him. The man who had once been my crush, my protector, my betrayer, and my savior was now simply my partner. The complexity of our journey had smoothed out into something durable and deep. We were a testament to the fact that you can come from nothing, that you can be broken by the world, and that you can still choose to build something beautiful. I thought back to the girl in the cupboard, 13 years old and terrified, convinced that the world was a place that wanted to destroy her. I wanted to reach back through time, to find her and tell her that she was right to cry, but that she was also right to wait, because someone was coming, not just to find her, but to walk the long, winding road with her until they both reached the light. "I love you," I said. It was the first time I had said the words aloud, not as a desperate confession in the middle of a frantic night, but as a calm, certain truth in the middle of a quiet life. Nathan looked at me, his eyes filled with a tenderness I had never seen before. "I've loved you since the day you hid in that cupboard, Carolyn. I just didn't know how to be the man who deserved that love until you taught me how." We watched the sun disappear completely, the stars beginning to prick through the velvet black of the night. The past was gone, the present was peaceful, and for the first time in our lives, the future was an open door. The story was over. But the life was just beginning. The air grew cooler as the night settled, but I didn't feel the need to move inside. There was a clarity to the darkness here, a sense of belonging that I had chased across estates, courtrooms, and server hubs. It wasn't about the geography, it was about the lack of secrets. I reached out and took Nathan's hand, my fingers lacing through his. His touch was firm and reassuring, the same hand that had held mine when we were kids, only now it was steady. "What should we do tomorrow?" I asked, a playful smile playing on my lips. Nathan chuckled, leaning his head back against the chair. "I'm thinking we go to the market, buy some fresh produce, and spend the day doing absolutely nothing of consequence. No data leaks, no corporate takeovers, no running." "That sounds like the most dangerous plan you've ever had," I teased. "It is," he agreed, "but it's the one I'm most looking forward to." I laughed, feeling the tension finally dissolve from my shoulders. It was a simple life, a quiet life, but it was ours. And in a world that often felt chaotic and cruel, the ability to build a sanctuary, a place where you could be honest, where you could be vulnerable, and where you could simply be, was the greatest victory of all. As I looked up at the vast expanse of the night sky, I realized that I wasn't afraid of the future anymore. Whatever it held, challenges, joys, or the unexpected turns of life, I knew we could face them. We had been forged in the fire, and we had come out the other side not as victims, but as victors. The girl who had been dumped at Somerset, the boy who had been labeled a bad influence, they were gone. They were the foundation, the memory, the strength. But who we were now. We were the architects of our own destiny. I closed my eyes and listened to the sound of the ocean, a rhythmic, eternal heartbeat that seemed to pulse in time with my own. Everything was quiet. Everything was right, and for the first time I could finally sleep without dreaming of the past. I was home. The years didn't pass with the frantic, adrenaline-fueled pace of our youth. They moved with the grace of the changing tides. We learned that healing wasn't a destination, but a practice, a daily commitment to acknowledging where we had been. Our small coastal home became a sanctuary not just for us, but for others. We started a modest scholarship fund, anonymously, for children navigating the foster system, ensuring that no kid would ever feel as invisible as we once had. It was our way of stitching the holes in the world that had once tried to swallow us whole. Nathan, the man who had once been a shark in a leather jacket, found a quiet, profound joy in the mundane. He taught himself carpentry, building sturdy tables and shelves with a patience he had never possessed as a teenager. Watching him work, his hands careful, precise, and gentle, was a constant reminder of how much he had changed. He wasn't building to hoard or to protect. He was building to create, to leave something lasting and tangible behind. I, too, found my own rhythm. I returned to my love of history, not the history of estates or empires, but the history of resilience, the stories of people who had been ignored, suppressed, or erased, and whose voices were finally beginning to ring out across the cultural consciousness. I started writing, using my own experiences not as a crutch but as a lens through which to examine the mechanics of power, survival, and the enduring nature of the human spirit. Our life wasn't without its ghosts. Every now and then, a news report about a corrupt executive or a systemic failure in the care system would send a shiver through our shared quiet. But the fear had lost its teeth. We had looked into the abyss and realized it wasn't a monster. It was just a collection of fragile people, desperately hiding their own insecurities behind a facade of strength. We rarely spoke of Bayside Hall, but its influence was a shadow that had long since been integrated into our light. We knew that the hall wasn't the enemy. The structures that dictated who was allowed to own, who was allowed to belong, and who was allowed to exist. That was the enemy. And we had done our part in making sure those structures were no longer absolute. In the autumn of our 5th year, we took a trip back to the region. not to the hall, but to the site of the old Somerset group home. It had been demolished years ago, and in its place, the community had built a small, vibrant park. We walked through the trees, the crisp air turning the leaves into a mosaic of orange and red. We found the spot where the old cupboards had been, the place where I had once huddled, crying, and where Nathan had found me. "Do you remember what you told me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "When you found me in the bathroom that first night after you'd been beaten?" Nathan stopped and looked at me, a soft, melancholy smile on his face. "I told you that you were better off alone, that you had to look out for yourself. And then you said," I continued, feeling the warmth of his hand in mine, "that you'd look out for me too." He nodded, the memory clearly vivid in his mind. I thought I was just being a tough kid playing the protector. I didn't realize I was making the most important promise of my life. We stood there for a long time, the wind rustling the branches above us, a quiet tribute to the two children we had once been. We weren't angry at them, we were proud of them. They had navigated a world that had not been built for them, and they had survived against all odds. As we turned to leave the park, we saw a group of teenagers laughing near the playground. They looked like any other kids, carefree, loud, and full of the chaotic energy of youth. But as I watched them, I realized how lucky they were. They were protected by the very shifts in policy and public awareness that we had helped to initiate. I squeezed Nathan's hand. "Look at them," I whispered. "They have a chance, a real one." "They do," he agreed, because someone finally stopped to look. We walked back to the car, the weight of the past finally falling away, replaced by the light, easy feeling of a future that felt ours entirely. We were no longer chasing a ghost of a life. We were living the one we had built from the ashes. As we drove away, I realized that the greatest victory wasn't the money, the justice, or the closure. It was the simple, beautiful fact that we had found each other when we were nothing, and we were still here, together, when we were everything. I leaned my head on Nathan's shoulder, watching the scenery pass by, a blur of green trees and distant rolling hills. The road ahead was long, but for the first time it didn't matter where it led. It only mattered that we were walking it together, hand in hand, into the brilliance of a life that was finally, truly, our own. The fire had not destroyed us, it had tempered us. And like steel forged in the heat, we had come out stronger, clearer, and more resilient than we had ever been. We were the masters of our own story, the authors of our own redemption, and the keepers of a love that had defied every attempt to break it. As the sun set, casting a final golden glow over the landscape, I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of freedom. It was the best smell in the world. It smelled like the beginning, the end, and everything in between. It smelled like home. The silence that settled over our coastal sanctuary was not the hollow quiet of an institution, nor the heavy, stifling silence of a corporate boardroom. It was the rich, vibrant silence of peace. 10 years had passed since the courthouse steps, and the world had moved on. The scandal of the Bayside conglomerate was now a footnote in a textbook on financial corruption, and the names Carolyn Green and Nathan Howe were largely forgotten by the public, exactly as we had intended. We had built a life out of the scraps of what was left, and remarkably, it had become a masterpiece. Nathan, the man who had been forged in the crucible of juvenile detention and tempered by the cutthroat world of international finance, had found his true calling in the tangible. Our house was a testament to his evolution. He had built it himself, board by board, over the course of 3 years. It sat on a bluff overlooking the Atlantic, a structure of cedar and glass that felt like an extension of the cliffside itself. He no longer wore the masks of the bad boy or the billionaire. His wardrobe was simple. His hands were perpetually stained with cedar dust or soil, and his eyes, those once icy blues, were now permanently crinkled at the corners. He had learned the most difficult lesson of all, how to be present. "You're staring," he said, not looking up from the drafting table in the corner of the living room. "I'm just watching," I replied, setting a mug of herbal tea down near his plans. "It's been a decade, and I'm still not used to the way you look when you're not planning a takeover." He chuckled, the sound deep and resonant in the quiet room. He stood, stretched his shoulders, and pulled me into his arms. We stood there for a moment, listening to the rhythmic roar of the tide below. It was a sound that had once represented the chaos of my life, but now it was simply the backdrop to our normalcy. "I wasn't planning a takeover," he said, his lips brushing my temple. "I was planning a nursery." I froze. I pulled back slightly to look at him. "A nursery?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded sketch. A small, sun-drenched room with a window seat and space for a crib, nestled into the south wing of the house. "I thought it was time, Carolyn. We've spent years healing. Maybe it's time we started growing." A rush of emotion, so potent it left me breathless, surged through me. Growing. Not in the way we had as children, forced to mature by necessity and trauma, but in the way a garden grows, with intention, care, and the slow, beautiful passage of time. In the months that followed, the house shifted. The spare room was transformed, the walls painted a soft, calming cream, and the shelves filled with books that had nothing to do with corporate espionage or historical resilience. I spent those months thinking about the children we once were. I remembered the cupboard at Somerset, the smell of cheap bleach and fear. I remembered the feeling of being entirely alone in a world that didn't care if I woke up in the morning. I had been terrified that I would carry that with me, that I would somehow pass that trauma down. But then I would look at Nathan, watching him carefully sand a wooden rocking horse he was carving by hand, and the fear would evaporate. We were not the people who had been failed by the system. We were the people who had built a system of our own. One evening, while we were sitting on the deck watching a storm roll in across the water, I brought up the subject of our past. "Do you think they'll ever know?" I asked. "Our child. Do you think they'll ever know who we were before this?" Nathan set his glass down and looked out toward the dark horizon. "They'll know who we are now. They'll know that their parents were survivors who chose to be kind, and that's enough. The past isn't a shadow that follows us anymore, Carolyn. It's just the foundation. You don't live in the foundation, you build on it." His wisdom, once so cynical, had become a lighthouse. He was right. We had spent so much energy trying to outrun our history that we hadn't realized we were already moving faster than it. When the baby came, it was not the dramatic high-stakes event that characterized our youth. It was quiet, intense, and profoundly ordinary. A boy. We named him Leo, a name that meant lion, a reminder of the strength we had summoned when we were at our most vulnerable. Holding him for the first time, I felt the final pieces of my fractured soul click into place. The girl in the cupboard was gone, replaced by a mother. The boy who had been a pawn of a drug gang was gone, replaced by a father. As I watched Leo sleep, his tiny chest rising and falling in perfect, peaceful time with the universe, I realized that we had successfully broken the cycle. The trauma that had been our inheritance was not going to be his. He would know a world where he was wanted, where he was safe, and where his parents were present. "He looks like you," Nathan whispered, leaning over the crib. "He has your eyes," I countered, "and thank God for that. They're the eyes of someone who knows exactly how to find his way home." Our life wasn't just about the three of us, though. We had made a promise to the kids who were still waiting in the dark. The scholarship fund we had established, the Green Howe Foundation, had grown into something much larger than we had anticipated. We didn't just give money. We spent our time mentoring, lobbying for systemic change, and creating safe spaces for children who had been displaced by the very systems that had once targeted us. We became teachers, advocates, and in our own small way, architects of a better reality. We learned that the most radical thing you could do in a world built on greed and corruption was to simply be kind, to be present, and to provide a steady hand for those who were lost. One afternoon, a young girl, perhaps 12 years old, visited the foundation office. She had been through 5 foster homes in 2 years and was currently living in a facility that felt all too familiar. She sat in the chair across from me, her eyes darting around the room, guarded and wary. "Why do you care?" she asked, her voice sharp with a defensive edge. "People like you only care because you get a tax write-off." I looked at her, seeing the mirror of my own teenage self. I didn't reach for a brochure or a business card. I reached for the truth. "I care," I said, leaning forward, "because I know what it's like to feel like the walls are closing in. I know what it's like to hide in a cupboard because it's the only place you feel safe. And I know that you don't need a tax write-off. You need someone who is going to stand next to you and not move until you're ready to stand on your own. The girl's eyes widened. For a second, the mask dropped, and I saw a glimmer of hope. The same hope I had once buried deep, waiting for the right moment to bloom. She didn't say anything, but the way she relaxed into the chair told me everything I needed to know. The years continued to turn. Our life became a tapestry of small, beautiful moments. Leo's first steps on the sand, the smell of cedar wood in Nathan's workshop, the quiet satisfaction of watching our foundation reach a child in need, and the way the sunset always looked just a little bit brighter when shared with the one person who knew every version of my story. As I sit on the porch now, watching Leo play in the garden with Nathan, I realize that the story I started writing the day I walked into Bayside Hall didn't end with a court verdict or a data leak. It ended here, in the small, quiet space we carved out of a world that didn't want us to succeed. We are not victims of our history. We are the architects of our own salvation. The wind off the Atlantic is cool, but the warmth of the life we built radiates from the windows behind me. I take a deep breath, the taste of salt and possibility on the air. We had gone through the worst of it, and we had found our way to the best of it. And as I close my eyes, I know that if the world ever tries to pull us back into the shadows, we won't run. We will stand. Because we have a home, we have a family, and we have each other. The girl from Somerset and the bad boy who promised to protect her had finally won their freedom, and this time, they weren't running from the past. They were building a future.